Welcome to the CannMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amirault. I am the Senior Marketing Manager at Medicinal Genomics and proud member of the team that puts on the CannMed Summit. The CannMed 25 speaker lineup is up on CannMedEvents.com along with our preliminary schedule. We do have a stellar lineup this year, including some familiar names, some returning presenters, and some new faces as well. They'll all be in Puerto Rico this June for the CannMed 25 Innovation and Investment Summit, and you can join them for a fraction of the full price if you register before February 19th, which is our early bird deadline. All the information is up at CannMedEvents.com, and I hope to see you this June. Our guest today is Dr. Michelle Peace. Michelle is an internationally recognized forensic toxicologist and a full professor in the Department of Forensic Sciences at Virginia Commonwealth University. She has been funded by the National Institute of Justice to study the proliferation of semisynthetic THC analogs in the unregulated market and define their relevant biomarkers. Her work impacts public health and public safety policies and initiatives. At CannMed 25, Michelle will present Why Some People Green Out, the analysis of unregulated hemp-derived cannabis products. Her team's study uses a liquid chromatography-tandem mass spectrometry method to analyze unregulated hemp products, and she found that all products that they analyzed were mislabeled in some way, either misrepresenting the cannabinoids contained therein or their concentrations. During our conversation, we discussed what has caused the rise of semi-synthetic cannabinoids in the marketplace, how Michelle got involved in testing unregulated hemp and cannabis products, some of the adverse events that have occurred from consuming semi-synthetic cannabinoids, how the LS-MS method allows Michelle's team to see compounds other labs can't, how consumers can protect themselves from mislabeled products, and whether federal legalization of cannabis would eliminate the semi-synthetic market. Before we get to my conversation with Michelle, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Preach Biotech. Preach Biotech Corporation is a vertically integrated company dedicated to the cultivation, manufacture, and dispensing of medicinal cannabis in Puerto Rico. With over 500,000 square feet of state-of-the-art facilities, Preach uses the highest standards of agricultural and manufacturing practices to guarantee the highest standard of medicinal cannabis. Their mission is to offer a natural and unique experience through medicinal cannabis that raises the patient's well-being and quality of life. Learn more at preachbiotech.com, and Preach is spelled P-R-I-C-H. Okay, and without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Michelle Peace. Good afternoon, Michelle. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
No, thank you for having me, Ben. I'm really excited for the conversation.
I'm excited for the conversation, and I'd like to say that we're excited to have you as an oral presenter at CannMed 25. We announced the lineup just last week, and I might be biased here, but I think it's one of the strongest lineups we've ever had. It's a great mix of familiar names and new faces. And if I'm not mistaken, you are a new face. Have you attended a CannMed event before?
I haven't. I'm really excited to be able to attend so that I can learn from, this side of the community, and also be a part of the conversations about, how do we help consumers be safe and still address health issues along the way. So I'm really excited to be able to attend and present. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I expect that your talk is going to be well attended since it covers a very hot topic in the industry right now, which is Semisynthetic cannabinoids or hemp-derived cannabinoids. There's more than one presentation touching on the topic, and we're also working on putting together a panel discussion about it, which I'm hoping you can participate on as well. So perhaps for those who aren't familiar, could you give us a quick primer on the current situation with semi-synthetic or hemp-derived cannabinoids? What are they? How are they made? And why are they seemingly everywhere these
Why
days?
are they everywhere? Yeah. So um, we the hemp-derived semisynthetic compounds that we see that are so popular in the marketplace, we believe really was given birth because of the explosion of the production of CBD. And because the CBD marketplace really reached market saturation, of course it then lost value. It's a pretty simple supply and demand business model, so to speak. And so when you're not making as much money with that product, or you've got excess stores of it sitting around that just gets harder to sell, then then we believe that manufacturers thought about, well, what can we do with what we have to then also push the marketplace, because the 2018 Farm Bill, the Agricultural Improvement Act, has a lot of very broad language in it. And so because of that broad language, manufacturers had the space to be able to produce these other compounds from CBD. And so through fairly straightforward chemical processes, you can make an array of analogs that look like CBD or delta 9 THC. And so, there was the scientific literature actually explained how to do this, how to make some of these chemical reactions to make other kinds of cannabinoids. And so just slightly tweaking some of those foundational chemical reactions can lead to an array of different products. And so what we wind up having now is there are, places on that molecular structure of tetrahydrocannabinol that can be modified. And let's say that's 3 different regions on that molecule. Well, if you've got, any arrangement that is in those 3 areas, you are going to be able to create hundreds of different kinds of analogs from that, right? Because there's 3 places that molecule right now can be modified. So, and modified easily. So, so when you take a look at those 3 areas and you modify each of those sections, you've got an array of compounds that can be manufactured from that. And so because there is looseness in the Farm Bill language, and because there has been some confusion as to what these compounds are, from a regulatory perspective, from a legal perspective, that has just allowed, while we lay in that confusion, then the marketplace has just been able to be as creative as they possibly can be. Nobody's really monitoring the quality of these products. So there's a lot of space. And when, as a forensic scientist, what I know is that when there is space left in regulatory language, then nefarious activity will take place. And I'm not saying everybody who has entered in this space has nefarious intentions. I'm not saying that. There are certainly some players in this industry who are generating maybe quality products for reasons to help consumers. But at the end of the day, I still don't believe, from my perspective, in the hundreds, if not thousands of products that we've evaluated, that we can still trust what is in these products. So, so I think at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of nefarious activity because, it's an easy way to make money, without oversight.
Right. So now you mentioned the broad language of the Farm Bill has sort of opened the door for this to happen. Now, if I understand correctly, is it the fact that it only specifies Delta 9 THC as being sort of the banned cannabinoid, or the one that's that determines whether it's hemp or cannabis?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, certainly, is that at the time that the Farm Bill was written, there was just concern about that singular compound and its place in the DEA's Controlled Substances Act on Schedule 1.
Right.
And so because that is the named compound, then there's place for other compounds to exist.
Right. And so, like you said, you have all these manufacturers or farmers are sitting on this glut of CBD, which was really what seemed to be the intention of the Farm Bill, was to kind of, create a marketplace for CBD, which then got saturated. And so they had to get creative with how do we turn this into a different compound.
Sure. Well, I would even say, was that really the intention of the Farm Bill?
Probably not.
The marketplace? No. The intention of the Farm Bill was to allow people to grow hemp and to grow hemp for non-pharmaceutical purposes, right? Right, because, I don't know, from t-shirts to bed sheets to animal bedding, right? So, so I think that was the original intent of the marketplace. We certainly have seen nationwide. We definitely have seen it here in Virginia, where the language was used in the process of Virginia wrestling with the Virginia Code and what are we going to legalize or not, and how are we going to do that. There were definitely lobbyists who got up and said, we want to do this because we're making rope, not dope. And, at the end of the day, everybody really knew that they wanted to grow hemp to be able to extract CBD from it. So, I think that the intention of the Farm Bill was to allow farmers a pathway to grow another kind of crop. We need to close up those loopholes.
Excellent. Okay. So I was hoping could you explain sort of what motivated you to start studying these cannabinoids and these compounds and their implications?
Yeah. So there's actually a long arc to it. So I'm funded by the National Institute of Justice. I've been funded by them since 2014 to evaluate electronic cigarettes and how they can be used and manipulated to vape drugs other than nicotine. And, I'll be honest, we always thought that THC in cannabis was low-hanging fruit. We thought somebody's going to do this. We don't really need to be in this space. We were really concerned originally, and still are, about people putting methamphetamine and cocaine and fentanyl and, their anti-anxiety medication. We were concerned about how they were going to use e-cigarettes to make those kinds of compounds, and what implications it had in the criminal justice system. And so what we really began monitoring was the nature of the unregulated nicotine e-cigarette marketplace. So we came to really paint the picture of what was happening in that unregulated space and how it was creating problems for consumers, in addition to how do you use them to vape other drugs. And somebody sent us a THC vape, and they said, surely this isn't THC. So, and it was labeled as 75% THC, something like that. And when we analyzed it, it was really more like 40% THC. That's still a lot of THC, but we thought, oh, this is the same thing that's going to happen in the cannabis industry is what we're seeing in the nicotine industry, because we had already published on and was characterizing nicotine vapes. So the unregulated ones, you can't trust what's on that package either in terms of the nicotine concentration. So that's really what set us off to now the industry has my attention, right? So we started monitoring the quality of those products, and we saw.
Now, sorry, not to cut you off, but these are the unregulated products?
Yeah, unregulated.
Got it.
So we saw the cannabis industry use the consumers as their test market for products. So we saw the chemical profiles of vaping products evolve pretty rapidly. And then, we're watching the CBD marketplace as well and analyzing those products too, which also you couldn't trust the quality of those products either. And then we received a product from somebody who said, listen, I consume a lot of cannabis, and this vape is not cannabis. And they sent it to us, and we found a really dangerous synthetic cannabinoid in it, 5-fluoro-ADB. And so that was the moment we realized, yep, nobody's monitoring this. It's not regulated. Enforcement is awful in the states that do have regulations. So now the industry has our full attention. And so there was a pretty public debate after we published that paper where we found the 5-fluoro-ADB in a CBD product that was marketed as safe for children. And so we didn't, what was the unintended consequence of that very public debate, right, in the media, from the New York Times to Consumer Reports, AARP, et cetera, we started receiving products from people who were having adverse events from taking a cannabis product. So we started analyzing those and realizing that that for a certain period of time, all of the products were either mislabeled or contained a synthetic cannabinoid. So we're watching the CBD marketplace in terms of, what's happening with this now oversupply that's being generated. And we saw the Delta 8 THC hit the marketplace. And we do a lot of surveillance shopping and secret shopping. So I went into a store to see if Delta 8 THC was in my community. And so I walked in, and there was almost a line out the door to buy Delta 8 THC. And in order to manage the crowd, the store clerk said, we need you to read this document that was taped to the display case. And it had an outright lie about the nature of Delta 8 on it. And it says Delta 8 is like CBD. And I thought that's fantastically dangerous. And right, because it underscores the ability of the industry to outright lie about the compounds. So we started then acquiring the Delta 8 products, and then we saw Delta 10 in the marketplace and 6A, 10A. So we started seeing some of these. And then I received a case that in which the consumer had such strong adverse event, I mean, outright disassociation and hallucinations and paranoia, that he committed a egregious felony. And now he's facing criminal charges and life in prison. And so I received the product that he consumed, and that's when we identified THCO acetate, and then started seeing all of the misinformation and disinformation about THCO acetate. So now I am fully committed now to monitoring this emerging marketplace. So we are now funded by the National Institute of Justice to monitor the marketplace, develop methods to analyze for all of the analogs that are in the marketplace currently, and then also assess, how do crime labs and hospital clinical labs, and like for people who are having adverse events, you need to properly attribute what that adverse event is to. So now, and we do surveillance shopping. So that's why the NIJ has currently funded us to specifically look at these THC analogs and how they've penetrated different marketplaces, and how do you analyze for them. So that's a long story as to how I got invested, but I think it has points in there as to what happens when nobody's watching.
Yeah, for sure. And I did want to ask you more sort of about these adverse events that folks are experiencing before they sort of reach out or send those products to you for analysis. So you mentioned the THCO acetate as being one of the more harmful cannabinoids as well. So something you might be able to, shed some light on what are sort of the most concerning of these cannabinoids and what sort of adverse events are they producing?
Well, so let's start with the kinds of adverse events that we're seeing. From a physiological perspective, from the point of view from what's happening to the body and the body organs, we're definitely seeing, respiratory problems, cardiac problems, that are certainly disconcerting at best and life-threatening at worst. We, from this cognitive behavioral perspective, we see where, people they have extreme paranoia. They are dissociating from their body. They're having severe hallucinations, terrifying hallucinations. So, when you take all of that into consideration, these can be life-altering. We've certainly had cases in my lab in which the person has been affected after consuming one of these, years later are still having significant problems. Have had two cases in which somebody reported having seizures. There was one case here in Richmond, Virginia, where somebody purchased a product and was at an outdoor concert and had a seizure. And they had to stop the concert and get her medical attention, and took her to the hospital. So, and this was an unregulated product that she purchased in a shop.
Hmm.
And, to paint the, you don't know what's going to happen, the claim was that that same joint was shared with two other people. And the other two people did not have a seizure. So, so this is part of the difficulty with these compounds. So in terms of the adverse effects that they can have.
Wow. No, and this is, I guess to reiterate, this is from the unregulated market, and largely because there are people in certain places that do not have access to Delta 9 THC because it's banned in that state or whatever. So they're looking for it elsewhere and are, kind of at the mercy of the actors who are producing these products.
Absolutely. I think some of the other challenge is that, we can't say that with any certainty. I would say we can't say at all. We can't even hint to that this list of cannabinoids analogs is more dangerous than this list. And the reason for that is that there is very little scientific research that has been conducted on the safety or the efficacy of any of these compounds. And so, that's some of the challenge. The other challenge is that you don't know how much somebody is consuming. So that's the other challenge in all of this, is that you can't believe how much the package says that's in it, and you don't know what the list of compounds is that's in it, right?
Mm.
So, we have found that, there are some products that maybe list 2 compounds on the package and contain 7 compounds in it. Well, what's the accumulation of effects from all of those compounds?
Right. Right. And now, I mean, I obviously you can't speak for the manufacturer, but do you think that that's intentional in terms of, they know that there's these additional compounds, or is it just such a messy process to create them that there are, additional compounds being created that, maybe weren't intended?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it's both. I think there are, some manufacturers that, because nobody's looking, nobody's watching, nobody's enforcing anything. Honestly, nobody's analyzing the products. There's only a handful of labs in the nation that are able to analyze these compounds. My lab is one of them. And so when you can't even attribute, an event to a particular compound, then the conclusion usually winds up being, well, it was a cannabis product, or it was a THC product, when it probably wasn't, or probably contained something else, or had way too much in it, right? The list is endless at this point.
Right. Now you mentioned being able to test for these, and I know that you used a specific technique for this study. I was wondering if you could speak briefly about kind of what that method is and why it was chosen for the study.
Sure. So we use, our primary instrument for analysis is liquid chromatography with a tandem mass spectrometer attached to it. And we use that instrument for almost every analysis we do in my lab anyways. And the reason for that is that, one, it is very sensitive. Right. So when you've got analytes, compounds that are in trace amounts in products, then you need to have an instrument that's going to allow you a really, really low limit of detection, right? Meaning you can look at things at very, very low concentrations. So the LCMS allows us to do that. The second reason why we use the LC tandem mass spec is because we can identify the molecule itself, meaning the molecular structure of a compound. So, right, we break that compound into fragments, and we analyze those. And then we break those fragments up again, and we analyze those. And we can assemble all of those fragments and determine what the original chemical structure is. So for most of the cannabinoids, we're able to identify them that way. There are some of the cannabinoids we can't. So, and that's just because, if you take a look at, let's say, delta 8 and delta 9 THC, the difference between those molecules is just a shift in that double bond, the location of that double bond. So for some of those, we call those isobars. For some of those compounds, we can't tell the difference between them. So if that's the case, then we have another instrument that we use that can separate them. So the LC tandem mass spec is our primary instrument, and then we use a GCMS as a support instrument so that we can determine, what the exact cannabinoid profile is in a product.
And so how does that method or technology compare to your standard cannabis testing lab?
Well, standard testing lab is using what we call an HPLC with it's like a UV a UV detector. It's a HPLC DAD or PDA. It's a UV detector, and so the challenge with that detector is that you cannot assess the structure of the molecular compound. So that detector essentially absorbs energy and emits energy from the compound, will absorb energy and emit energy, and you're able to separate those through the chromatography. And so because it doesn't give you any kind of structural information, then if compounds are really similar, then you can't really, and they're coming out at the same time, you don't know that you have two compounds in there. You can't ascertain what those are. So at least with the LC tandem mass spec, we're able to determine the difference. And so I'll give you an example. So several years ago, me and several of my colleagues, we started a quality assurance testing lab for the cannabis industry here in Virginia. And we were, we were doing well. We were, this was our side hustle. This was we're gonna build it. We're gonna be, we're going to be a scientific voice in this, and we're also going, because we're forensic scientists, we're going to use the instruments that give us the best information. So that was going to be the LC tandem mass spec to do potency testing, knowing that the rest of the industry was using this HPLC. So we had a client come to us who had 3 different lab results for the same product. Mm-hmm. And they were vastly different in and of themselves, those 3 results. And they said, we don't know which one to believe. So when we ran the product, it was light years different from what is now the cluster of the original 3. And it was because that product, we were able to see on the LCMS, we could differentiate between delta 8 and delta 9 THC. And the HPLC at the time, you could not differentiate it. So, right, so we knew early on in the emergence of these compounds that LCMS gave us the ability to differentiate between the different cannabinoids, but that also made us a unique voice And so the industry was not happy with us, because, we came out very strong, right? Because remember, that's a for-profit laboratory. My
Right.
research laboratory at the time is investigating all of these emerging analogs. And so we're seeing not only that the concentration of all these analogs are not what's on the label and that there's more of them in there, we're also finding residual solvents. We're also finding contaminations like hair and dirt in products, or high microbiological counts. And so I came out really, really strongly against Delta 8 uh,
Mm.
in Virginia when it first emerged. And as a result, our business dried up. So, so we had to shutter the lab. I don't regret it, not one bit,
Yeah.
right? Because we always said we were going to stand by the science, we were going to stand by quality, and we took very seriously our job to protect consumers.
Absolutely. No, and that's that's the way it should be. So for the example that you just mentioned with the producer who was getting different results from the labs took it to you and you were able to kind of see the difference between Delta 8, Delta 9. Was that a flower product?
No, that was not a flower product.
Okay.
Yeah.
And okay, because yeah, I was going to be surprised because it was my understanding that Delta 8 is made only in very, very trace amounts by the plant itself.
Correct. But, I'll be honest. We see that flour products are sprayed with Delta 8.
Mm,
So, it wouldn't have been surprising. That wouldn't have been a surprising result, even if it had been a flour product, but that wasn't a flour product.
yeah. And then the other thing is you were mentioning, or one of the key findings in your study here is the mislabeling of the different products. I was curious, how much of that do you think could be attributed to the fact that folks are using different equipment than yours and are not able to see sort of the differences that you are able to see?
Yeah, I think definitely some can be attributed to that. If you happen to have somebody who is, cares enough to maybe send their product out for analysis,
Yeah,
um, then
that's
uh,
big F.
then the challenge is going to be that the lab is probably not going to be able to analyze for all of these analogs. But we don't think the manufacturers actually sending these products out for a real analysis.
Yeah,
You
that's a
know,
big
they're
problem.
they're manufacturing the certificates of analysis. We have one product we received where, because not only are we getting the products, we also go to the websites to see
Mm,
what's being said about these compounds and these products. And so we have one product in which the website literally says, guaranteed these compounds are in this product, but because the labs can't analyze it, we can't tell you how much is in there, but we promise it's in there. And it wasn't.
yeah.
There was a bunch of other stuff in there, but so I mean that's the landscape we live in. So
Right. And I guess with that, sort of, what are the implications of these findings on sort of the broader hemp industry or even for consumers? What's sort of the takeaway here?
yeah, so I think there are a couple of implications here. And again, I mean, I get it. There are probably some um hemp manufacturers, CBD manufacturers, analog manufacturers, whatever they're calling themselves, who might care and have the intention of creating these products for consumers who don't have access to Delta 9 THC in their states. But they are still complicit in the adverse events that people are experiencing right? You have an industry that is so far not been held accountable for people dying, for people having significant adverse events that have affected their lives for years. So I think that's some of the problem with the lack of oversight. And of course some of that it's an analytical problem, right? Because there's not many labs that can actually analyze these. I think it complicates from a state perspective and even the federal perspective. I think it complicates the state of legalization. Because most of the adverse events are not being adequately attributed, right? So we don't know if the product they consumed was just 10 times the THC concentration or contained 7 or 8 analogs. We don't know that, but usually what gets reported is that it was a cannabinoid product or it was a THC product. And so when an adverse event gets attached to, well, it was a THC product, then that becomes difficult language to ignore. So we need to be able to, from a public health and public safety perspective, be able to properly attribute the adverse events. So I think, those are a couple of the bigger impacts of having an unregulated hemp industry.
Yeah. No, and then there is sort of another side of sort of the hemp industry too, where there are some manufacturers I know who are producing not analogs or semisynthetic, but, THC, Delta 9 THC, but in what they interpret as a low enough concentration to be deemed hemp.
Yes, correct. and we've analyzed some of those products.
Okay.
And in almost 100% of the products we've analyzed, they contain over that 0.3% THC.
Absolutely. So what is a consumer to do? Just say no?
Now, I think it's buyer beware, right? Yeah. I think the first thing is the consumer has to realize that if they are purchasing a product in an unregulated market, right? Meaning that you are buying it at a smoke and vape shop or
online.
If you are in a convenience store, that just because it's in the marketplace doesn't mean that it's safe, right? We as a culture believe that, well, surely if it's in a store and I can buy it in a store, then somebody has said this is safe and reasonable for me to consume. And so they don't really appreciate the difference between unregulated and regulated marketplaces necessarily. So I would say that for all consumers is that you should, despite the taxes, purchase your products in a regulated marketplace. I think that is the safest path forward for consumers. And I get it that some people have said, well, we don't want to pay the taxes and the taxes are too high. And I just read a scientifically published manuscript recently that said that, well, consumers really don't care about the high price. They care about how much product they can buy for a price point. That's a very important distinction. So, needless to say, I think that it is important for consumers to be very cautious about what they're hearing about all of these analogs, and the quality of the products and the safest place for them to purchase their products is going to be inside of the regulated marketplace, despite some of the challenges in the regulated marketplace.
Right. And where that's available, right?
Sure, it's so hard in states that don't have a regular legal regulated marketplace. It's hard for the consumer, right? So, or has
Yeah.
created hurdles, right? So, I mean, how hard is it going to be for some people to actually get, their note saying that they can have medical marijuana? So I think states have to think about that if they really care about the, consumer safety. Then they have to make it easier for consumers to acquire regulated products.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like, and of course, this might be a bit optimistic, but if cannabis were federally legal and regulated, seems like a lot of these issues go away.
Yeah, they're not, I'll be honest, they're not really all going away. I get asked this question a lot in terms of, and from a lot of state legislators is like, well, if we create a regulated marketplace, then all of this stuff is going to disappear, right? And no, it is never completely going to go away
Mm,
because there's always going to be a marketplace for people looking for alternative experiences,
mm,
no matter what the drug is, right? So this is, I think, some of the challenge. It won't all go away. A lot will go away, right? Because you've got a lot of consumers, whether they're cannabis naive or in pain or whatever, who or just want to experience it, and so just for those kinds of consumers, you got to create a pathway for them. But I think for the really nefarious types, there's always going to be a marketplace.
mm. Well, Michelle, this is a fascinating topic. I think we could probably do a whole nother hour, but we'll save it for CannMed, and folks should definitely come out and continue the conversation.
Right.
But before I let you go, I did want to give you an opportunity to share any additional resources that you think that folks who are listening who want to maybe read up more might be interested in, and then of course where they can find you and your work as well.
Sure. I have so we're building out a web page for the lab that's going to have links to our manuscripts. And we're also developing some documents, right? Because a lot of like school administrators like don't know, they don't know, and they're trying to protect the children in their marketplaces. And so we're generating products like reading materials, one-page reports that are easy to digest with that information. So I'm happy to share with you the link to that and links to the manuscripts that people might be interested in reading.
Excellent. Yeah, send the links. I'll put them in the show description so it's easy for folks who are listening to check that out.
Right.
All right, Michelle, thanks again for joining me on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you down in Puerto Rico.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Ben.
All right.